So my friend, who goes by the internet username Wenchicus, which I think is the absolute funniest thing in the world, she has a podcast called The Bar is Low, in which she finds and reviews the strangest, cringiest fan fiction she can find online. And the topic of this episode was communist fan fiction, and I was a guest. You can hear me talk about Leon Trotsky and the Russian Revolution, and review a fic titled 50 Shades of Red, which you can read yourself through a link in the description. If you enjoy laughing at hilarious, cringy, not safe for work fanfiction, you can check out the rest of the episode as well as other episodes of The Bar is Low through another link down in the description. Just warning, I recorded this fic like the day after buying a new microphone. Also, I had to record in my car for various reasons, so the sound quality is gonna go in and out a bit. For the parts where the sound goes out, I'll write up on the screen what I was trying to say. Also up on the screen are notes of times that I misspoke or said something incorrect. Keep a lookout for those. So go ahead and enjoy, or don't enjoy. Either one, it's your choice. I'm not the boss of you.
What's up, it's your pal Wenchicus, and this is The Bar is Low. Every episode we take a look at a fanfiction or a collection of fanfictions, and these can be either good, bad, or in between, but mostly, they're bad. Today we have our first ever guest here on the show to help us tackle some communist dictator porn. When I said I wanted to do a communist episode, she was all over it, and I need her help today because she knows more about history and the history of leftism than I do. Would you like to introduce yourself, comrade?
I'm Comrade Sophia. I'm from Ohio, and I'm a communist. So.
Yeah, we figured. So, today's fucked up-o-meter rating is, I don't really know what it is.
I would say my story is probably about a 4.
Alright, what does it have in it? Does it have, like, murder and rape and shit in it?
No.
Alright, mine does. And it also has graphic depictions of elderly world leaders engaging in sexual intercourse. So I'm just gonna go with a 10 out of 10 to be safe. Okay, should we also do a disclaimer? We're not tankies. Tankies bad, Stalin bad. Alright.
Yeah.
Would you like to go first?
Okay, yeah, I think I can go first. My first question is, what do you know about Leon Trotsky?
That he got murdered with an ice pick.
Yeah, that he got murdered by an ice pick. You know anything else about him?
In Mexico, and he fucked Frida Kahlo.
Yes, he did fuck Frida Kahlo. I'm proud of him for that. I was going to read you a little bit about Leon Trotsky. So, Leon Trotsky was born as Lev Davidovich Bronstein in 1879 to a Ukrainian Jewish family. And now Ukraine, at that time, was part of the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire was not a very fun thing to be a part of, especially if you were Jewish. The Tsarists were doing all sorts of fucked up genocidal shit, pogroms and persecution and all types of insanity. So as you can imagine, I don't think little Lev grew up in a very pro-Tsar house. And I don't know if the Bronsteins were personally victimized by any of that bullshit, but they did have some money, which of course is the great insulator against all adversity.
Of course.
So our boy, he was no proletariat. He was an upper middle class farmer. So I think they were landowners, and he was a country boy. But as you know, lots of country boys don't stay in the country forever. When he grows up, he moves to the big city to go to school for mathematics.
Don't flex on knowing math.
Yeah, he was a huge fucking nerd, as most communists are. But he goes to school for mathematics, but he abandons that plan because his life changes forever, and history changes forever because he meets a girl. He meets a hot SJW Marxist girlfriend named Alexandra.
Bitch, I need one of those.
Yeah. And she convinces him to join the Socialist Party, which of course is hella illegal in Tsarist Russia because all politics left of Joe Biden were illegal pretty much at that time.
Joe Biden. I'm not gonna talk about him today.
So he gets arrested, and he's about to get shipped off to Siberia. And Alexandra, I don't know if she got arrested too, or if she was just like with him when he got arrested, but they get married in prison. Like, they get married, they have like a traditional Jewish wedding in the prison in Moscow, and then they get shipped off to Siberia together because they have to get married if they want to go together, which I'm sure is just the most wonderful honeymoon location ever. I mean, the scenery is beautiful, you know, chilling out on the frontier. Drop them off in these like little podunk hick frontier towns is what they used to do to them. And so they're in Siberia. They have a couple babies in Siberia, but eventually his wife convinces him to escape, and then he gets back to like civilization, and he changes his name to Trotsky. The story goes it was one of the prison guards at the prison where he was named Trotsky, so he names himself after a prison guard. And no self-respecting communist ever goes by their real name.
Yes, that's why they call me Wenchikisthoticus, because I'm very self-respecting.
I mean, it's not as cringy of a pen name as Stalin.
My name, Joey Steele!
So calls himself Trotsky, and then he kickstarts his career for real at this point. And the Russian Revolution, 90% happened in the media. All of the who's who of Russian Marxists, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, they all wrote for newspapers and magazines and wrote pamphlets. They had these like leftist newspapers where they would urge the workers to organize and strike, or they would write op-eds arguing with other socialists. Like 90% of the stuff you read from socialists is arguing with other socialists.
Of course it is. That sounds exactly like where we are today.
Yeah. The revolution very much was a media-driven event. So he can't stay in the Russian Empire. He moves around from country to country. Wherever he goes, he would set up shop and start writing newspapers in Russian to try to send back home. And he lives in London for a while, and he and Lenin work on a newspaper together with some other people called Iskra, which means the spark. He lives in Finland. I think he lived in Spain. He lives in New York City for like 3 months, but he eventually goes back to New York City as soon as the February Revolution happens and he's allowed. And so all this crazy shit is happening at that time. So Russia has like a warm-up revolution in 1905 where they basically become like a parliamentary monarchy, but there's like this huge reaction period after where they basically become like straight up fascists. Like there's these fascist gangs running around Russia called the Black Hundreds, which just sends a bone-chilling tingle down my spine.
Fucking edgy.
And Trotsky gets remarried, has a couple more babies. By the way, like all of his kids died. Like his daughters got sick, and one of them killed herself after she got sick. Both his sons were killed by the Stalinists, and I think his first wife was killed by the Stalinists.
Can I get an F in the chat?
F. Press F to pay respect to baby Trotskys. But then everything changes in March 8th of 1917. Do you know what day that is?
There's some revolution.
Yeah, that's the February Revolution. But they were using the old Russian calendar, so it was their February, our March. And do you know what March 8th also is? International Women's Day. So International Women's Day, the reason they call it that is because on March 8th in 1917, all of the factory girls in Petrograd decided, you know what? Fuck it. We are sick and tired of this bullshit. And they go on general strike. And everybody was trying to tell them not to go on general strike, including the Bolsheviks. They're like, no, the cops will slaughter you. You do not need to go on strike. And they're like, fuck the Czar and fuck you. We're going on general strike. And they take to the streets. And they're like running down the streets of Petrograd, marching, and they're like going up to the factories where the men are working, like, get your ass out here, you scabs, we're going on fucking strike. And the cops do nothing. The cops watch this happen because the cops are like kind of all on the communist side by that point because they're fed up with it too.
Comrade cops, wow, who would have thought?
So they go up to the Winter Palace, they demand that Tsar Nicholas, his family step down, and just like that, the 300-year Romanov dynasty is forever ended.
And they shoot the kids, right?
Well, no, that's later.
Oh, okay.
So they actually get put under house arrest. And so Trotsky at this time, he was living in New York City. And he got into New York City like 3 months earlier. And he's like there with his wife and kids. And he's like, well, I guess we're American now. We're probably going to be here forever. Maybe Eugene Debs and Mother Jones will have coffee with me. And so, like, the first thing he does, he's, like, living in Brooklyn where, like, all these other Eastern European Jews are living. He spends all his days at the local library reading on American history so that he can join the American Communist movement.
What American communism movement?
Oh, are you kidding me? Like, communism was just as big as in America as it was in Russia.
Really? Maybe I'm just thinking about, like, today that's not mainstream at all, you know?
So, okay, the Cold War was basically, they weren't afraid of Russian communists. They were afraid of American communists because, like, so many other countries were on the verge of communist revolutions. Like, there was an attempted revolution in Germany and Italy. There very well could have been a revolution in the United States. It was a pretty violent time, but we tend to call it the labor movement here in the States. But that was happening in America at that time, and it's how we got the weekend, was because of the American communists.
Oh, that's really depressing.
Fighting in the streets and fighting and dying. Like, people died, you know, for this in the United States. But so he's there in America for like 3 months, and he's like, oh, I guess I'm an American now. And then he gets the news, revolution in Russia, and he's like, kids, pack your fucking bags, we're going home. And they run back to Russia, although he does get detained in Scotland for a while, in like a Scottish jail, because they don't like communists over there either, I guess. So he gets back to Russia, and after the Russian Revolution, the first one, February Revolution, basically what happens is Russia has two governments at this point. There's the provisional government, which is like the government that all the other countries recognize. It's like a parliament. They called the parliament the Duma, and the Russian Congress today is still called the Duma. And it's run by this guy named Kerensky, who's like a moderate social democrat, kind of like an Elizabeth Warren type. But there's also another government, because all of the workers and the peasants, and even the soldiers too, set up these Soviets. And the Soviets were like a cross between like a labor union and a city council. So like all the people in the town, like all the workers, they'll go to the Soviet and they'll vote on important things like whether or not to go on strike, how we're going to do shit in our town. So it's kind of like these like directly democratic sort of institutions. But they have the Soviets all over Russia, and everybody's participating in the Soviets. So they have two governments. And Lenin gets elected to the executive committee of the St. Petersburg Soviet. And at first, like, after the February Revolution, like, after any time the government changes power, there's going to be, like, some instability, and things started devolving kind of into a hot mess. There was a uprising against the provisional government that was violently suppressed, in which Trotsky ends up in jail and Lenin has to go into hiding. The provisional government was just really acting a fool. They were refusing to pull Russia out of World War I, so all these people were getting killed, and the country was in severe debt. They were refusing to do pretty much any economic reforms. So at first, like, the moderate socialists are popular in the Soviets, you know, people like the Mensheviks, the socialist revolutionaries, you know, people who believe in getting along with the political government. But most of the Bolsheviks are in favor of overthrowing the provisional government. But eventually the provisional government just acts like a fool so much that the Bolsheviks get voted into power in the Soviets. And the first thing they did is agree that they were going to kick out the provisional government. And so they have an insurrection. So the Soviets get all the soldiers who are part of their soldier Soviets. And they basically have like a police operation where they just go and like take over all of the buildings in Petrograd. And like nobody dies. Like it was like really like fast and quiet and bloodless because like all of the soldiers that the provisional government had, those guys were on the side of the Soviets. Because they're like, yeah, we're done.
Imagine fucking up that bad.
Yeah, that even the cops won't support you.
Yeah.
So now we've had the October Revolution and everybody's happy. But for like 5 minutes, because immediately after, every single major capitalist country invades Russia. They're like, no, we're not going to be having no fucking communist countries, because if we let them get away with it, there's going to be communist uprisings in our countries too. So they all invade Russia at once. You know, United States, Germany, England, Japan, France, they all invade Russia at once. And there's a massive bloody civil war. There's a shit ton of like innocent people die and starve to death. But who leads the Red Army to victory? That would be your pal, Leon Trotsky.
I thought I was your pal.
Yeah. Oh,
you can have more than one pal.
You're my pal too. Leon Trotsky, he was the first leader of the Red Army. He had this like huge armored train, which was like really badass. And like they had this train that was like pimped out and like had like machine gun turrets and armor, and he would travel back and forth across the fronts in this train, like stopping to give speeches to the soldiers. But yeah, they win. They barely win, but they win thanks to Trotsky's leadership.
Oh my god, I almost said I want to ride on Trotsky's pimp train, but then I realized how sexual that sounded.
Well, I mean, considering the other content of this podcast episode. So, I mean, I want to ride on the armored train too, though.
Yeah.
Because I totally want one. It sounds cool. So the Russian Civil War is over. Now the fun part begins. And by the fun part, I mean the hard part and the boring part that nobody wants to do. It's just actually running the country.
That's so not sexy.
So you gotta understand that Russia at this time was like broke-ass third world country. It was a hot mess. Like only like 3% of the country was actually proletarian, actually urban working class. Everybody else were like peasant farmers. It was not really a good situation to be having socialism. And they were really, really hoping that other countries and like the more developed countries would also have communist revolutions, and then all of the communist countries could work together. But that didn't happen, and the Russians were left pretty much on their own. And a lot of the reason why it devolved into the authoritarian mess that happened was because they were trying to survive on their own when they really were not set up to be able to do so in a correct way. But you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. So they're arguing about how to run the country, and the biggest controversy is what to do with the peasant farmers. Some of them are like, no, we need to collectivize the farms, or no, we need to just tax grain. And eventually what they come up is with this idea that Lenin has called the new economic policy, where basically there's going to be communism in the city and markets in the country. And they do that for a while. And then Lenin dies. He has like a stroke. Oh, by the way, Trotsky was like, he was off somewhere doing something right after Lenin died. And Stalin gave Trotsky the wrong date for the funeral on purpose. No. He was like, oh, look, Trotsky didn't come to the funeral. The
fucking drama. Like, they're like a bunch of teenage girls or something, just being catty, it sounds like.
It's funny in hindsight with the distance that I have, but it probably wasn't so funny then. And so, like, in this time, the Central Committee, like, they weren't really being ruled by, like, a lone person. Although at this point, if there was a lone person in charge, you would probably label it as Trotsky. They were ruled by a committee, and Stalin was on the committee, Trotsky was on the Central Committee, and then a bunch of other people who we don't have time to talk about are on the committee. And they're continuing to argue about, you know, what are we going to do with economic policy? Because the new economic policy that Lenin came up with, the NEP, it was having a lot of problems. It was causing like inflation and deflation things going on at once, and it was a hot mess, and it made it so that it was very hard for the country and the city to trade with one another. So they're fighting, and there's also other ideological differences that are popping up between the quote-unquote Stalinists and the Trotskyists. Eventually Stalin just like fucking snaps, and he just decides, you know what, I'm done arguing. You commies are driving me nuts. And having spent some time with communists, I kind of can relate. It's like, I'm done arguing.
Yeah, politics.
Well, not talking about you.
Yeah, no, I'm just vibing.
If you go onto like internet forums, everybody argues. And so he ends up kicking Trotsky out of the country and killing all of the other like actual communists who are in the government and replacing them with all these like sycophants. Oh, and then Stalin decides to do all of the policies that Trotsky originally came up with.
What the hell?
Although he was like mean about it. I don't think Trotsky would have been as evil about it. I don't know, maybe he would have, who knows. And so eventually that ends up with Trotsky spending like 10 years in exile, and he spends a lot of time writing. And, like, he writes a bunch of books trying to describe how the USSR was turning into a dictatorship. He also writes a lot about fascism and like the rise of fascism. He was really just a brilliant theoretician. Like, he was a genius, honestly. But Stalin was like, no, I'm done with having to read your books that you wrote all the way in Mexico. Oh, yeah, he's in Mexico. He lives there for a while and getting his brains fucked out by Frida Kahlo. Just having a grand old time.
It sounds like it would be such like a weird crossover, but no. It was canon.
I don't know. I guess she was a communist, too. But eventually, Stalin's like, yeah, fuck that, and he sends a dude to murder Trotsky with an ice pick. And that was the end of Leon Trotsky, but not the real end, because we still have all his brilliant writings. And so, like, some of the differences between the Stalinists and the Trotskyists, like, I was really surprised to learn this, but the Stalinists are actually a lot more conservative than the Trotskyites are.
That's why you always say that Stalin was a Republican.
Yeah. I made jokes that Stalin was actually a moderate Republican. Stalin, like, he had a personality that was, like, very, like, cautious, almost cowardly. I would say coward, but he was kind of cautious and conservative. Like, after the February Revolution, when all of the Bolsheviks are calling, overthrow the provisional government, revolution, Stalin was like, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think we should get along with them. Like, and he writes all these, like, op-eds in Pravda. Stalinists believe in, like, revolutions happening in stages. Like, they think, like, countries need to have, like, a quote-unquote bourgeois democratic revolution before they can have a communist revolution. Like American Revolution was a bourgeois democratic revolution. So when Stalin's in power, like, he is in communication with Mao Zedong, who's in China, fighting in China.
Yeah.
And so Mao Zedong fucked around in the Chinese countryside for years and years and years when he could have taken power at any point, and the current dictator of China was named Chiang Kai-shek, and he was a fashy bastard, and he killed pretty much as many Chinese people as the Japanese did. But Stalin was like, no, you have to get along with Chiang Kai-shek, because you're just going to have a regular democratic revolution, and then you, the Communist Party, are going to run in elections against the Nationalist Party. And Mao Zedong was like, okay, we can't do this anymore. Eventually he just goes and he chases Chiang Kai-shek onto the Taiwan island. Kind of afraid of revolution. But the Trotskyists they're more radical. They believe in something called permanent revolution.
Right, like worldwide.
Yeah, like either the revolution is everywhere or it's nowhere. And also the Stalinists think that you can have revolution in one country at a time. But the Trotskyists are like, no, you have to either get rid of capitalism or it's not going to work.
That's pretty hot.
Yeah. I'm a Trotskyist, as you might imagine, because tankies suck and also are just really stupid and dumb.
Imagine being an unironic tanky in this day and age.
I don't know. Yeah, it's just like, I don't get it. Like, they're just, the Stalinists, like, they're past the point of evil. They're just stupid, really. There's all these stories of, like, Stalinists who were, like, labor union leaders, and, like, the people would be calling for revolution, and on general strike, and the Stalinists would go and negotiate with the bosses, because they're, like, afraid of revolution.
That doesn't sound very communist at all. Well, I mean, it does, like, I guess, but, like, no, that's not sexy.
Now, Trotsky's main rival was Joseph Stalin. So we're getting into the thick here, huh? We're gonna... Yeah. So Stalin and Trotsky, that's an interesting set of history, but we're talking about internet culture. And in internet culture, whenever you have two people who hate each other's guts, that obviously means that they are fucked.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what we're going to be reading about today.
Oh, my God.
We have a Stalin, Trotsky, shipped coffee shop AU.
Coffee shop AU. I don't think I've ever actually covered a coffee shop AU. This is going to be my first. Wow, can you believe that?
And so the story opens in a modern London coffee shop.
I'm sorry.
Because it's a coffee shop AU.
Stop saying that, you're making me laugh.
And I don't think we ever learned the name of the shop, but what you need to know is that it is owned by a motherfucker you might have heard of named Muammar Gaddafi.
They weren't even alive at the same time, right?
They weren't, but it's a modern one, so...
It's a modern coffee shop AU. I can't stop saying that. It's hilarious.
And at a later point of the fic, not at the beginning, the author describes this delightful tidbit about Muammar Gaddafi, which is pretty indicative of the writing style as a whole. Quote, he could take on 3 armed men in a fight, a feat he was overtly proud of, as he should be. It's not every day you meet someone who is able to take on 3 armed men in a fight.
Why do they say that twice?
I don't know. He was proud like a mother would be proud of her son for passing a test, because he was a very special boy. End quote.
Yes, that's what your mother's proud of you for, is passing a test.
Because he was a very special boy.
Special boy.
And of course, all I could think of is if I went into a coffee shop and saw the owner wearing Ray-Bans, a turban, and a button-down shirt with pictures of Africa on it, I would be like, yeah, this motherfucker could probably make a good cup of coffee. He probably sells cocaine too, but my budget is tight, so I'm just gonna buy the coffee.
Yeah.
And Muammar Gaddafi is engaged in a passionate and sultry love affair with a young barista, an art student by the name of Leon Trotsky. Now, I mentioned earlier, Trotsky went to school for math and not art, and he dropped out because he met a hot Marxist SJW girlfriend, but there is no hot Marxist SJW girlfriend in this story. There's just an African dictator, and they're having sex in the back of the coffee shop.
In the back of the coffee shop? At least have the decency to, like, get a room, like...
I don't know, you gotta do something over your break, man.
I guess. When I'm on break, I just, like, want to fucking screw around on my phone or some shit. I want to get cum on my uniform.
You gotta do what you gotta do, man. Like, love is love. So Leon Trotsky's is a young art student barista who has sex with his boss. One day, Leon is in the front of the shop taking orders like a good subservient proletarian, and in walks this handsome young stranger named Joseph, who has nice hair and good looks, and he orders a drink. Quote, Trotsky gasped, an intake of breath, as a gasp usually is.
What do you think?
It was the same gasp he made when he saw his dog humping the satay with such ferocity that he instantly wished Joseph was the satay and he was the dog.
Oh my god.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I think a satay is like a couch. He'd even let Joseph scold him in the same way, if Joseph wasn't the satay in this particular fantasy, that is. Luckily, Joseph wasn't a satay. He was a living flesh-and-blood male standing in front of him, all bones and tweed jumpers. End quote.
Why, OP?
And this might be a fun time to point out that Joseph Stalin was 5'4", had one arm that was shorter than the other due to a childhood injury.
Oh my god, he's a manlet? Are you telling me?
He was 5'4".
That's as tall as I am!
And also his face was covered in smallpox scars, because he got smallpox when he was like 7. So that's who's walking into this shop. Of course, in real life, that did not stop Stalin from impregnating every woman between Moscow and the Polish border. The guy...
Including getting that sweet underage pussy, am I right?
Oh, yeah, oh my god. Hey, but what happens in Siberia stays in Siberia.
Except that it didn't.
It did not, though. Another story for another time.
That's a tangent, huh?
Yeah, Joseph Stalin was a pedophile. That's all y'all folks at home need to know.
Oh, I've never seen like this fucking tanky posting like, oh, I can't believe our king would fuck 13-year-olds. I was like, bruh.
Like, what kind of dude who has that type of personality does not fuck children? You're like, this is the type of guy who would totally be one of Jeffrey Epstein's clients.
Oh, God.
When you're an insecure narcissist with too much power. Of course, he did all this before becoming a dictator, but I'm sure he did all sorts of things after becoming a dictator, too. But anyway, Gaddafi comes out of the back of the shop, and he gets all jealous, and he sees the two young commies staring at each other. And he so politely tells Joseph to fuck off, and he tells Leon to stop ogling other dudes. But, of course, after Joseph leaves, young Leon cannot stop thinking about him. And, he just goes on his break, jerks off in the back of the store, thinking about that beautiful pox-marked face. I can't hate on him for having smallpox. He didn't choose that. But now I feel mean.
It's okay to make fun of him. I mean, like, come on. If there's anyone who deserves to be made fun of.
It's totally punching up. But when you punch up, you gotta punch at things that are not also punching down. I don't know.
Yeah, just gotta punch in all around, though. We punch in all around.
Yeah. I mean, if you're punching Joseph Stalin, I think that's okay. I think that's a good use of your time in any way. So he goes out to find Joseph into London, and we have this scene. He started in the local vintage shop, because where else would such a beautiful, up-to-the-times man spend his time? He probably had a lover, just as cool and ironic as he was.
Cool and ironic? What is this, fucking about memes?
Well, this was written in, 2012 and 2011 when, hipsters were, the huge trope that was going around.
Oh.
So, apparently this person looked at this picture of Stalin and thought, that's a hipster.
That's a hipster. So
there's so many hipster jokes in this fic. Trotsky couldn't help but scold himself for not being so socially aware and for not wearing as much tweed as he ironically should. Joseph couldn't be found in any of them because, of course, how could Trotsky be so blind? They were obviously ironic. He had to go deeper into Joseph.
Oh!
No, he couldn't think about that now. He could stealth wank when he was alone and crying in his bed in his room for two, but only filled by one. Next he tried the park. It seemed like the most obviously ironic place for a man such as Joseph to be. It was a beautiful day. The sun shone like the perfect gleam of the strand of hair Joseph would always sweep to the side.
Oh my god.
He was so cool. Trotsky kept an eye out for any beautiful men, but alas, none as beautiful as his soon-to-be beloved. It was too good to be true.
Get the fuck out of here.
End quote.
Fuck out of here. People are really out here with their Rule 34 ass motherfucking...
I'm pretty sure this pic is supposed to be satirical.
It is, but still.
So maybe that's the reaction we're supposed to be having. But eventually he finds Joseph in a local pizzeria. Now, in real life, Stalin only ever worked one regular proletarian job. He was a record keeper in a meteorological station, so he was a fucking weatherman.
That sounds really boring.
Yeah, he was a fucking weatherman, and he did it for like a year, because right after that, he got arrested for protesting, and once you're arrested for being a communist in Tsarist Russia, can't exactly go back to work regular jobs anymore. So I guess at that point, your choice is either to flee the country, or live as a criminal, or overthrow the government.
Yeah.
So he finds him in the pizza shop, and so Trotsky looks up, he sees that Joey Boy is his waiter, and they exchange flirty dialogue, but eventually it comes time to take the order, and Joseph says, "Have you come to a decision?" And Leon says, "I think I'll have you."
Oh my god, that's so cheesy.
I don't know, I laughed. So they sneak outside, and they start making out and kissing and whatnot, and it's all cute and tender, and then Joseph drops a bombshell that he's engaged to be married.
To a 13-year-old.
It's not that person, but the girlfriend does come into the story, and she was a real person. And I love how the writer describes Trotsky's reaction. "Oh," he said, "because what else could he say? I'm going home to listen to Dolly Parton and cry about being alone. Your face will forever be in the corner of my mind when I wank. You owe me £3.50 for the pack of Kleenex I went through last night thinking about you? No. Oh, would have to do." End quote.
He must have been listening to 9 to 5, though.
I mean, it's the song of the proletariat, man. Anthem of the working class. But they decide, that what the girlfriend doesn't know won't hurt her. So they go back to Leon's apartment and they have sex. And, apparently Joseph Stalin is a bottom.
I'm sorry.
And I'm like, you know what?
Oh.
I can see it.
Oh my god, we're having this conversation. That's kind of what's going on in my fic too. That I'm gonna talk about later a little bit.
And it says he let Leon take him as a rider would take a stallion, or how a stallion would take a mare. He wasn't quite sure which was more appropriate. As he lay there, Leon's firm and fleshy arm laid strewn across his nude and well-formed pectorals. All he could think of was Kat. She'd been wondering where he'd been all night. She'd never believe his "at the strip club, honey" excuse. Not this time. He left a note on Leon's bedside table. 4 simple words. "Don't contact me again." Simple words they may have been, but they were also the hardest thing he had to write. He gathered his clothes and left. The sun was beginning to rise. End quote. Oh, it also mentions off the cuff that Lenin and Trotsky had sex at some point, and, whatever, I can believe it.
Of course.
Trotsky goes back to goddamn fucking Muammar Gaddafi, is what I was trying to write. And he confesses that he fucked the handsome customer, but he and Gaddafi make up and have some crazy sex.
How graphic is this sex, by the way?
It's actually not. It's not graphic at all.
So there isn't, like, the gross imagery and shit that I always love to roast.
It's pretty mild compared to the stuff that you usually read on your podcast.
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about crazy today.
I'm scared and excited, just like getting on a roller coaster, man.
Sweet.
And Jojo goes back to his girl,
Jojo!
And they have this little scene where they're laying in bed together. But it's hard for Joseph because he wants Leon Trotsky's firm, strong, proletarian arms stroking his cock instead of the beautiful woman who will never seem the same to him again. But I'm going to take a minute here to talk about Kat, because she was a real person. Joseph Stalin's first wife was named Ekaterina, like Catherine with an E at the beginning. Instead of email, it's E-Catherine.
Okay, that must be some weird Russian thing.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common Eastern European name.
Why hasn't that caught on with, like, the soccer moms and stuff who want to spell Caitlyn, like, 16 different ways?
Ekaterina. I don't know, it's a pretty name. Although they weren't Russian, though. They were Georgian. I don't know if that matters, but they called her Kato. That was her nickname. And they got married sometime in like in the early 1900s. And by all accounts, he truly did love this girl. Like, so when he was out being like a gunslinging, terrorist, bank robbing, communist outlaw, that's who he came home to. There's a funny story that I think is funny. Like, they're living in Tiflis, which was the capital of Georgia. So they're in like 1907, Stalin and his gang, they pulled off this huge bank heist in the town square in Tiflis. And when his wife is like 2 blocks away, and there's this account written by the sister-in-law, and she's like, yeah, so we were just sitting out on the balcony with the baby, and we heard the bombs going off. So he comes home to his wife and his 3-month-old baby after robbing a bank, and he's like, yeah, honey, it all went fine. Also, pack your bags. We're moving to Azerbaijan. And so they got married, and they had a baby named Yakov, and Yakov is a tragic story all on his own. He tried to kill himself a couple times, got murdered eventually by the Nazis. Tragic story. But 7 months after Kato gives birth, she dies of typhus. I think about her every goddamn day. Because she's just trying to live her life, and just fucking dies of typhus. Because it was 1907. Not that we in 2020 have any parallels going on.
Yeah, wow, we're so much better nowadays.
And there's a story where he's at her funeral, and he turns to one of his old buddies, and the buddy is writing about this years later, and he says to his buddy, "This creature softened my heart of stone. She died, and with her died my last warm feelings for all human beings."
Bruh, don't let us man lead a country after that shit.
And was this Stalin's tragic backstory? A lot of people think so. Anyway, that's what happened to Kato, and I don't know, I feel like maybe they should leave her out of the story. She just wanted to live her life. And
yeah, real person fics always pretty iffy.
Yeah. Okay, back to this story. Anyway, so in the meantime, Leon Trotsky and Muammar fucking Gaddafi. I can't get over the fact that it's Gaddafi. There are so many other people who could have been at the other end of this love trial.
But no, it's this motherfucker.
It's Muammar fucking Gaddafi.
They weren't even alive at the same time.
But Gaddafi and Trotsky are engaged to be married. Gaddafi's like, put this ring on, bitch, we're getting hitched. And Trotsky, who, unlike his real-life counterpart, had no balls, is like, okay, if you say so. And then right after this happens, Joseph runs in and he's like, guess what, Leon? I broke up with a Caterin. We can be together. And so, yeah, as you imagine, the next scene is very awkward.
Oh my god, the drama.
I mean, like, when I first started reading this fic, I was like, oh god, this is so stupid. But then I started getting
no.
Like, I'm like, oh no, they can't be together now. So Joseph is real upset, and he does what any young hipster does. He travels around Asia to find himself, paying his way with his parents' money and by sucking dick.
Why did they include that?
I don't know.
By sucking dick. Great, now I have to imagine that.
I mean, you know, you read the fic that you read, so I'm not...
Well, yeah, that does have some dick sucking in it.
So he gets a job in, like, a quote-unquote massage parlor in Taiwan.
Oh, no.
And he just kind of hangs out in Taiwan for a while in a state of depression. So, Joseph Stalin is jerking off tourists in Taiwan, and that's the visual you need to have in your head when you go to sleep tonight.
That is a visual.
Meanwhile, Trotsky and Gaddafi are getting ready for their wedding, doing all the wedding planning. And they're also trying to find a surrogate so they can have a baby. Some of the language in these paragraphs is a bit confusing because when I first read the story, it sounded like Leon and Joseph had just had like a one-night stand, but there's also stuff peppered in that makes it look like they had like an ongoing relationship with multiple hookups. So one day, Gaddafi says to Trotsky, okay, you little bitch, you're gonna go to Taiwan for your bachelor party with all these dude bros I hired to pretend to be your friends. 3 guesses where this goes.
What a coincidence.
Trotsky gets to the hotel that Gaddafi booked for him, and we have this scene here. Quote, he decided on a massage to relax him. His lads would be arriving a day late because Gaddafi didn't want to fork out the money for their tickets because his paycheck was spent on making sure Leon looked pretty. A massage would remind him of Joseph, how he would stand naked near his window in his messy student bedroom, smoking a roll-up because a student can't afford cigarettes when they're addicted to buying online pornography.
Why would you buy porn? Shit's free, bruh.
I don't know. Yeah, porn is free, man. I guess there's better porn that you can pay for, but...
Yeah.
How he would caress his hands over his stomach and chest, and member before, ever so slightly, pulling on it gently, how his hands would bring him to orgasm, and one of the downstairs neighbors made a noise complaint. How many good memories. He sighed and put on his 100% wool bathrobe. The on-site massage parlor was white, like a royal child of incest born to keep the line pure. It smelled like patchouli oil, a smell that reminded him of when Joseph lit candles in his room for some added romance, and Leon complained that the smell was too harsh, and Joseph went to sulk and wouldn't talk to Leon until he'd brought him some Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia and fed it to him like a 14-year-old girl on her period. A voice distracted him from his thoughts. A mane of dark hair met him, attached to a head, and attached to that was a body, all alive.
Yes, that is how it works.
Sir, if you'd like to. Leon swallowed. There was no semen in his mouth, just the knowledge that he knew this man, and that made him swallow. The thought that he'd swallowed this man's semen also made him swallow again. Joseph?
Why?
End quotes. And of course, Leon doesn't want to tell Joseph that he's there for his bachelor party, except there's this here. Joseph blinked. One manly tear cascading down his Vogue-worthy cheekbone, splashing onto the floor like the first drop of rain of the autumn season, or a little bit of urine when a child has been on a really long car journey and can't hold it any longer. And Joseph says, "Come home with me, Leon," he whispered, and bit his lip in a way that was both seductive and a very bad idea because he seemed to be wearing lip gloss, and he got a little on his front tooth.
Oh my God.
Leon looked down at the floor. "I can't," he said sadly. "I'm sorry, but I can't, Joseph. That was the past. You and me, this is the present. This isn't some story, you know? It's not a novel or a magazine or a periodical or a coffee shop AU fan fiction. It's real life. I have commitments. I can't go home with you." Joseph blinked. "I have strawberry-flavored lube," he said. "Where do you live?" asked Leon.
That'll win him back.
I don't know. Strawberry-flavored lube sounds gross to me, but whatever, man. And then, of course, they go back to the shitty little apartment that Joseph is renting, and they have sex. And they have this little pillow talk scene, which made me laugh, where Joe says to Leon, "Don't go." And Leon answers, "I have to. There's no Apple store." Because apparently they are hipsters.
Oh my God.
Of course, I'm pretty sure Taiwan is a pretty wealthy and developed country, so I'm pretty sure that there are Apple stores. In fact, a lot of the descriptions of the scenes in Taiwan are kind of racist, but title drop, the bar is low.
Yeah.
The next morning they argue. They're all emotionally confused and young, and he's about to get married next week, so Leon basically says, "This is the time and date of my wedding back in London, and you can come and stop it if you want." And so, Leon Trotsky goes back to London, a place where he did actually live in real life. He and Lenin wrote their newspaper together there. But he's not going to write a newspaper. He's going to get married to Muammar fucking Gaddafi. And Joseph Stalin is back in Taiwan, probably wishing he'd played a less passive role in the Chinese Civil War and letting Chiang Kai-shek run off onto that shitty little island with all of China's money. But of course, he does eventually decide to go break up the wedding, and he's at the airport, and we get this dialogue here. Like he desperately is trying to prove to the ticket lady that he's not a pedophile or a sex tourist. He's like, "I'm not a sex pest," and they argue about it with some witty dialogue. But yeah, Joseph Stalin, when he was in Siberian exile, hooked up with a 13-year-old girl, and he got her pregnant, and that baby died, so he got her pregnant again. But then the February Revolution happened, and he was allowed to go home, and so he says to the girl, like, "It's not me, it's you. I'll send you a postcard." And he ran away, but he did send her a postcard.
That makes up for everything, doesn't it? Wow.
So when your teenage girlfriend and son are living in Siberia, that's a good thing to do, is send them a postcard. But eventually he does decide to go break up the wedding, and actually that's where the thing cuts off. Like, the author never went to show us the stoppage of the wedding or how it was intended to end. I don't know, maybe that was intended to be the end, but anyway, I had a good time. So the good part of this fic was the writing itself. It took me a while to get into it. I thought it was like cringy and stupid at first, but I kind of feel like that was the intention. The tone is very clearly supposed to be satirical, and about halfway through I was like, you know what, this is actually really funny, and I'm actually rooting for them to get together now. Mostly because there comes a point where you have to suspend your disbelief and disconnect the real historical figures from the fictional characters that are on the screen. And the prose in the dialogue is actually really funny. I tried to read a lot of it, but obviously I can't for time, so let me read a few more of the best lines.
Please do.
Out of context for you. He didn't think he'd be able to love another like he'd loved Joseph. He'd given him his all. He'd pulled a muscle in his leg. Another one is, it took Joseph weeks to muster up the courage to return to the coffee shop, which really sucked because they genuinely did have a fantastic pecan pie. Not too heavy, not too light. Or when Jojo finds out that Leon is engaged. This couldn't be happening. Joseph had left Kat, all soft curves and womanly hormones, for Leon. He and Leon were going to be together forever, or at least for a few years until the sex became dry and stale and they could no longer look at each other without being reminded of better earlier years.
That's a little too real right there.
But I loved, like, the writing in this. It was so funny. And they had these colorful little metaphors. The chapters were short and digestible, which, you know, is good because it was actually funny. Like, I liked it. But one thing I didn't like that is kind of a problem for me is that it's not actually about Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. Like, obviously this person read a little bit about Stalin and Trotsky because, like, he knew the detail, or she knew the detail about the name of Stalin's wife. But there wasn't really any effort to incorporate jokes about who these people were in real life. Like, there aren't any jokes about communism.
Yo, weird.
Yeah, no jokes about the Trotsky-Stalinist rivalry, and no ice pick jokes at all.
No ice pick jokes. I make ice pick jokes all the time. It's my favorite.
Like, how funny would it have been if the author had actually incorporated bits of these guys' real personality or things about the world they lived in? There's so much potential in that. Like, for example, the fact that Stalin couldn't fucking speak Russian. Like, he learned Russian as a second language, and he struggled with it his whole life, which is why you never really hear recordings of Stalin like you hear recordings of contemporaries like Hitler or Churchill. Because he was Georgian, which is, like, really strange language. It sounds like something you would make up for, like, an alien conlang. It's not related to any other language in the world. It's, he had a lot of trouble learning Russian, but he had to because the Russian schools would punish children for speaking their native language. But, like, imagine that, like, some, like, hot guy comes in to your coffee shop, you guys order coffee, and he can't fucking speak, and, like, language and communication problems are like the heart and soul of comedy. Like, you can put that in there, or the fact that Stalin robbed banks. There's no jokes about robbing banks. Like, imagine how hilarious that would be. Like, Joseph Stalin lived an absolutely batshit life, absolutely batshit, before he settled down to be a dictator, which is probably the most batshit job a person can have. Like, there's so much comedic fodder in there, and Leon Trotsky actually wrote a biography about Stalin.
Oh, no.
Like, imagine how funny it would be if you had the ship and then you draw upon the source of how the guy actually saw each other in real life. And, like, Trotsky thought that Stalin was like a dumbass. Like, he kind of was. Maybe not as much as Trotsky thought, but, like, there was a line at the beginning of the biography. It was, Lenin came to power in Russia because Lenin could write. Hitler came to power in Germany because Hitler could speak. Stalin could do neither. So, like, Trotsky paints a picture of Stalin as being, like, this guy who has, like, the personal charisma of a dead frog.
Me.
And he describes it as being, like, all, like, nervous and quiet in meetings and not very confident, very cautious, and he wouldn't speak up unless he was sure other people would agree with him. But then he would just, like, go back to his room to sulk if people didn't like what he had to say. Just, like, he's just like, this guy's just so annoying.
That actually sounds like me, though. Oh no. Not good.
Yeah. I was not able to find anything about what Stalin thought about Trotsky, though.
Tragic.
Because otherwise, I'd have to do that. I'd have to read things Joseph Stalin wrote. I was hoping that somebody would turn, like, communist Marxist jargon into sexual innuendos. Like, I was looking for dictatorship of the proletariat to be used in a sexual context, or permanent revolution in a sexual context. No jokes like that. And, there was a movie called The Death of Stalin, which you might have heard of. And one of the reasons why it was so good was because they took advantage of the fact that the people in the movie were real people. And they, would research little things about all of the characters' lives and who they were, and they would put it in the movie. And so you would have these characters in front of you who are so vibrant and fleshed out and really funny. So I'm going to say, if you are going to write any type of story where one of the characters is a real person, at least read through the person's Wikipedia page.
Oh man, roasted. Shit.
It also is a really good idea to read things that the people they themselves wrote. Like if you read stuff that Trotsky wrote, he has this really dry wit. He'll just completely roast a motherfucker and sound completely cool doing it, and then go right back into his academic sounding language. Like the guy was he was cool, man.
I think this author was just a horny thought.
Yeah. Or, and I have actually read some things that Stalin wrote. I read some articles that he wrote when he was a 25-year-old revolutionary, and Stalin sounds like a guy making videos in his car.
Is that not what we were doing?
That is what we're... But hopefully I sound better than Joseph Stalin's writing. And Trotsky, in the biography, he rips Stalin's writing a new one. He mentions that he would actually laugh when he was reading it because it sounded so bad. But
me doing the show.
There was this hilarious article that Stalin wrote that I saw where he's bitching about the Georgian nationalist movement. And he's so mad. It's so funny. I forget what he said. Why are they trying to divide the proletariat into different countries? I don't get it. And every other word is in sarcastic quotation marks. And he's so bad. This boy's gonna snap one day, and it was so funny to me. So that's another thing. If you're gonna write stories with real people, read shit that they wrote. But the author didn't seem interested in doing it. They seemed like they just saw the photos of young Stalin and young Trotsky and came up with the idea that they thought was funny based on the pictures. And the idea that they went with is that they're liberal art hipsters. This was written in 2012, when hipsters were the big meme. But I don't know, I kind of got a little offended because the author takes these communists who were committed communists and he turns them into a pretty uncommunist things. There's all these jokes about how they engage in various types of conspicuous consumerism and the clothes they wear, or relying on their parents' money, and just being petty bourgeois, gentrifying hipsters. And, Trotsky, he could squeeze himself into a shirt and tie, but Stalin, when he was young, he was actually, a slob. He would be a slob on purpose because he was, trying to, not fit in with the bourgeois norms. And so there's the stories, when he's at, this Catholic school run by the monks would always try to get him to, shave and cut his hair, and he wouldn't do it. And he's fuck the church, fuck the Czar, fuck the cops, and fuck you. I'm a poor, dirty proletarian criminal, and I'm proud of it. That picture of young Stalin, where he has that scarf and the nice hair, he looks like a hipster, but that picture is a mug shot. And this was before he got into, robbing banks or running protection rackets. In that instance, he was arrested for joining strikers on a picket line. And I kind of think it's important to remember that it is a mugshot. And it's one of thousands of mugshots taken of leftists during that era. And I'm pretty sure the Tsarist secret police treated their prisoners with absolute kindness and dignity and never beat them or killed them or tortured them ever. And I don't want to get all soapboxy, but the Russian Revolution, which brought about the end to the unspeakable horror that was Tsarism, and the international labor movement as a whole that it was part of, that gave us things like child labor laws and basic workplace safety regulations. People fought and died for that stuff. And they ended up in jail. So you see that mugshot, that's what I think about. Respect the troops, kids. Freedom isn't free. So that's what I wanted to end on, because that picture was a mugshot. That's all I have.